I'm 78 years old now, and I spent the last 2 years of my life imprisoned by my own child. If I'm able to tell this story today, I owe it to my 12-year-old grandson. Without his courage and love, I probably wouldn't even be alive right now. Are you ready for what I'm about to tell you? Because sometimes the greatest evil comes from the people you love the most. My name is Eleanor, and I was a teacher for over 40 years before I retired. My husband passed away when our son Michael was just finishing college. I was proud of how I raised him as a single mother for most of his life. He grew up to be handsome and smart, got a good job in marketing, and married a beautiful woman named Cynthia. They gave me a wonderful grandson, Tommy, who filled my heart with joy. After I retired, I lived alone in the house my husband and I had bought when we were young. It wasn't anything fancy, just a modest 2-bedroom home in a quiet neighborhood. But it was paid off, and I had managed to save a little money over the years. I thought I had everything figured out for my golden years. How wrong I was. It all started about 3 years ago when Michael and Cynthia began visiting more often. At first, I was delighted. They would come over for dinner, bring Tommy to see his grandma, and Michael would help me with little repairs around the house. Cynthia would sometimes bring me home-cooked meals or help me organize my closets. I thought I was blessed to have such a caring family. "Mom," Michael said one evening as we sat in my living room, "Cynthia and I have been talking, and we're worried about you living here all alone." "Oh, I'm fine," I assured him. "Mrs. Peterson next door checks on me, and I have my friends from the senior center." "But what if you fall? What if there's an emergency?" Cynthia chimed in. "It keeps us up at night thinking about you here by yourself." I didn't want to be a burden on their minds, but I also wasn't ready to give up my independence. For weeks they kept bringing it up, how dangerous it was for me to live alone, how they worried constantly, how they couldn't focus on their jobs because they were so concerned. "We have a solution," Michael finally said during one of their visits. "Our house has that extra room downstairs. Why don't you sell this place, move in with us, and we'll take care of you? You won't have to worry about bills or maintenance anymore." It sounded reasonable when he put it that way. I was getting older and some tasks were becoming more difficult. The stairs to my bedroom sometimes made my knees ache. And wouldn't it be wonderful to see Tommy every day? "What about my independence?" I asked. "Mom, you'll have your own space," Michael promised. "Your own bathroom, your own TV. You can come and go as you please. We just want you close so we can make sure you're okay." Cynthia mined enthusiastically. "It will be like having your own apartment, but with family right upstairs if you need anything." I spent weeks thinking about it. I loved my home with all its memories, but the idea of being near my family, especially Tommy, was appealing. And they seemed so sincere in their concern. Finally, I agreed. We put my house on the market and it sold quickly for a good price. Michael suggested I put most of the money in an investment account that he would manage for me. "You'll have a nice monthly income from it," he explained, "and you won't have to pay rent or utilities at our place. You can use that money for whatever you want, travel, hobbies, spoiling Tommy." It all sounded so perfect. I gave Michael a check for $220,000, almost everything I got from selling my house. He promised to invest it wisely. The day I moved in, they had a small welcome party. Tommy was excited to have his grandma living with them. The room they gave me was small but neat, with a single bed, a dresser, and a small TV. It had a tiny bathroom attached. "It's not as spacious as your house," Cynthia said, "but it's cozy, right?" I smiled and thanked them. I was grateful. Little did I know that I had just walked into a cage that would soon have its door slammed shut behind me. What happened in the days that followed still makes me shudder when I think about it, because that's when everything changed and I realized the terrible mistake I had made trusting the people who should have loved me the most. It happened so gradually that I didn't see it coming. The first few days in Michael and Cynthia's house were pleasant enough. Tommy would come downstairs after school to tell me about his day, and we'd sometimes play cards or watch TV together. But I started noticing small changes in how Michael and Cynthia behaved toward me. It began with comments about my movements around the house. "Mom, try not to use the stairs too much," Michael would say. "We don't want you falling." Or Cynthia would remark, "It's better if you eat in your room, Eleanor. The kitchen gets so crowded at dinner time." Within a week, my freedom to use the house had shrunk to just my small bedroom and bathroom. They always had excuses. The living room was being redecorated, the kitchen floor was just mopped, they were having important work calls in the dining room. Little by little, I was restricted to my tiny space. Then came the day when I decided to go for a walk around the neighborhood. I put on my coat and was heading for the front door when Michael intercepted me. "Where are you going, Mom?" he asked, a strange edge to his voice. "Just for a walk," I replied. "It's such a nice day." His face darkened. "I don't think that's a good idea. The sidewalks around here are uneven. What if you fall?" "I'll be careful," I assured him. "No," he said firmly. "I can't let you risk it. If you want fresh air, you can sit by your window. I'll open it for you." I was shocked by his tone, but didn't want to cause problems in my new home. So I nodded and went back to my room, feeling confused and a little hurt. The next morning, I noticed something odd. The doorknob on my bedroom door had been replaced. The new one had a keyhole on the outside. I confronted Michael about it when he came down with my breakfast tray. "It's just a precaution," he explained casually. "You've been a bit confused lately, wandering around at night. This way, we can make sure you're safe." "Confused? Wandering? I haven't done any such thing," I protested. Michael sighed as if dealing with a difficult child. "Mom, you don't remember. That's part of the problem. The doctor said this might happen." "What doctor? I haven't seen any doctor since I moved here." "We discussed your condition with Dr. Baxter last week. You were there, but you probably don't remember. He's concerned about early dementia." I felt like I was in some bizarre nightmare. I had no memory problems. I hadn't seen any Dr. Baxter. But Michael spoke with such conviction that for a moment I questioned my own mind. Was I forgetting things? That night, I heard the click of the lock after Michael said goodnight. I was officially a prisoner in my own room. My cell phone mysteriously disappeared the next day. When I asked about it, Cynthia said I must have misplaced it, another sign of my confusion. When I demanded to use their phone to call my friend Susan from the senior center, Michael said, "I don't think that's a good idea, Mom. You've been saying some strange things lately, and we don't want you upsetting your friends or having them worry unnecessarily." Days turned into weeks. My world shrunk to those four walls. My meals were brought to me 3 times a day. I was allowed to shower every other day, with Cynthia standing outside the bathroom door just in case I needed help. My television only showed the channels they approved of, mostly old movies and nature documentaries. The only bright spot was Tommy. He would sneak down to see me when his parents were busy. He didn't understand why Grandma had to stay in her room all the time. "Dad says you're sick," he told me one day, his young face troubled. "I'm not sick, Tommy," I whispered, afraid to be overheard. "They're keeping me here against my will." He looked confused, unsure whether to believe his grandmother or his parents. I couldn't blame him. It was an impossible situation for a child to understand. One day, I overheard Michael and Cynthia talking outside my door. They didn't know I was listening. "The investment from her house is really helping with our debt," Michael was saying. "How much longer do we need to keep this up? Taking care of her is a pain." Cynthia asked, sounding irritated. Just until we can convince her to sign the power of attorney papers, then we can move her to that care facility in Henderson and use the rest of her money how we want. My heart nearly stopped. This had never been about my safety or well-being. It had been about my money all along. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife could. My own son, my flesh and blood, had imprisoned me to steal my life savings. As I sat there in stunned silence, I realized the terrible truth. I wasn't just trapped in a room. I was trapped in a carefully constructed lie that could cost me everything, including my freedom for the rest of my life. Life as a prisoner in my son's house quickly became unbearable. My daily routine was monotonous and demeaning. I would wake up, wait for someone to unlock my door for bathroom access, eat whatever food they brought me, watch the limited television channels they allowed, and go to sleep, only to repeat it all again the next day. My attempts to reason with Michael or Cynthia fell on deaf ears. Whenever I protested or demanded my freedom, they would exchange knowing looks. "See how agitated she gets?" Michael would say to Cynthia, as if I wasn't even in the room. The doctor said these outbursts are typical of her condition. This fictional condition became their excuse for everything. If I raised my voice, it was an episode. If I questioned their story, it was my confusion. If I refused to eat the bland food they served, I was being difficult due to cognitive decline. I began to understand their strategy. They were creating a paper trail of my supposed mental deterioration. Michael mentioned doctor's appointments I never attended and medications I never took. He kept a notebook where he documented my concerning behaviors, all fabricated, of course. I realized with growing horror that they were building a case to take legal control of my life. The worst part was the isolation. None of my friends knew where I was. My neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, from my old neighborhood, had my cell phone number, but that phone had disappeared. Michael told everyone that I was adjusting to my new living situation and needed time before having visitors. The loneliness was crushing. There were days I would sit by the window for hours, watching people walk by, wondering if anyone even noticed the old woman looking out from behind the glass. Sometimes I'd see a police car drive past and I'd think about screaming or breaking the window to get their attention, but the windows had been secured with child-proof locks that I couldn't force open. My only ally in that house was Tommy. Sweet Tommy, with his innocent heart and perceptive mind. He knew something wasn't right, even if he couldn't fully understand what was happening. He would sneak me extra desserts, bring me magazines from the living room, or just sit with me and talk about school. "Grandma," he whispered one afternoon while his parents were watching TV upstairs, "are you really sick in your brain? Dad says you forget things and might hurt yourself." "No, Tommy," I said carefully, knowing I needed to be gentle with how I explained this. "I'm perfectly fine in my mind. Your dad and mom, they're not telling the truth about why I'm kept in this room." His eyes widened. But why would they lie? How do you explain adult greed and betrayal to a 12-year-old? I chose my words carefully. "Sometimes adults do wrong things for money, even when they should know better." He frowned, processing this information. "Is that why they took your house money? I heard them talking about using your money for our new pool." I felt sick. They were spending my retirement savings on luxury items while keeping me prisoner. But I didn't want to turn Tommy against his parents entirely. "Tommy, I need help," I said softly. "I need to contact my friend, Mrs. Peterson, or the police. Do you think you could help me make a phone call when your parents aren't around?" He looked scared, but nodded slowly.
I could try, but Dad keeps his phone with him, and Mom's has a password. What about at school? Could you use a phone there? Maybe, he said uncertainly. But who should I call? What should I say? I gave him Mrs. Peterson's number and made him memorize it. I also told him exactly what to say, that his grandmother was being kept against her will at their address and needed help. Tommy promised to try, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He was just a child, caught between loyalty to his parents and concern for his grandmother. It was an unfair burden to place on him, but I was desperate. Days passed with no word from Tommy about whether he'd made the call. I began to lose hope. Maybe he had told his parents about our conversation. Maybe he had tried but wasn't believed. After all, who would take a child's claim seriously when they contradicted what his parents were saying? Then one evening, something changed. I heard raised voices upstairs. Michael and Cynthia were arguing heatedly about something. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was angry and defensive. Later, I heard a car pull into the driveway and doors slamming. Through my window, I caught a glimpse of Tommy being ushered quickly into the car by Cynthia, who looked furious. They drove away, leaving Michael alone in the house. Minutes later, my door flew open. Michael stood there, his face contorted with rage. "What did you tell Tommy?" he demanded, stepping into my room. "His teacher called us in because he was asking about elder abuse in class. Did you put him up to this?" I felt a surge of pride in my grandson's cleverness, followed immediately by fear at the dangerous look in my son's eyes. Tommy hadn't called Mrs. Peterson. He had found an even better way to raise the alarm. But now I was alone with Michael, who looked more threatening than I had ever seen him before. And as he advanced towards me, I realized that the thin veneer of concern he had maintained was cracking, revealing the true darkness beneath. And I wondered if I had just made my situation infinitely more dangerous.
"Answer me," Michael shouted, his face inches from mine. "What lies have you been feeding Tommy?" I pushed myself back in my chair, trying to create distance between us. I told him the truth, that you're keeping me prisoner to steal my money. His laugh was cold and humorless. "Who's going to believe that? You're a confused old woman with dementia. I have the medical records to prove it." "Forged records," I countered, finding courage in my anger. "I haven't seen any doctor." "It doesn't matter what's real anymore, Mom," he said, his voice dropping to a frightening calm. "What matters is what people believe. And everyone believes I'm a devoted son, taking care of his mentally declining mother." He paced the small room, running his hands through his hair. I could see him thinking, calculating. "This complicates things," he muttered, almost to himself. "We need to move up our timeline." I felt a chill run through me. "What timeline?" He ignored my question. "You've made this harder than it needed to be. We were trying to do this the nice way." "There's nothing nice about imprisoning your mother and stealing her money." Michael's face hardened. "You know what, Mom? You were always so self-righteous, so sure you knew best. Dad and I used to talk about it, how exhausting it was living with your constant judgment." His words stung, twisting the knife of betrayal deeper. This wasn't just about money. There was resentment I'd never known existed. "Your father would be ashamed of what you're doing," I said quietly. Something dangerous flashed in Michael's eyes. For a moment, I thought he might strike me. Instead, he pulled out his phone and made a call. "Cynthia, change of plans. We need to move her tonight. Tommy's complicated things." "No, I'll explain later. Just get him to your sister's like we discussed and come back." "Yes, bring the papers." He ended the call and turned to me. "You have one chance to make this easy on yourself. When Cynthia returns, you're going to sign some documents voluntarily, and then we're taking you to Peaceful Pines Care Center." "What documents?" I demanded.
Power of attorney, authorization to manage your finances, standard stuff, he said dismissively. I won't sign anything. Then we do this the hard way. We take you to Peaceful Pines sedated, and Dr. Baxter, who happens to be a good friend of mine, declares you incompetent. Either way, I get control of your assets. I felt trapped, cornered, like an animal. I had no phone, no way to call for help. The windows wouldn't open wide enough for me to call out. My only ally, Tommy, had been sent away. I was completely at their mercy. While Michael went upstairs to prepare whatever he needed for their plan, I sat on my bed, desperately trying to think of a way out. I looked around the room for anything I could use, a weapon, a tool, something to communicate with the outside world. There was nothing. I heard Michael moving around upstairs, drawers opening and closing, papers rustling. He was preparing for whatever came next, and I knew I had to act before Cynthia returned. Suddenly, I remembered something. Tommy had shown me his secret project a few weeks ago, a walkie-talkie set he'd gotten for his birthday. He kept one in his bedroom and had hidden the other one in my room behind the dresser so we could talk after his bedtime without his parents knowing. We only used it a couple of times before Michael almost caught us, and then Tommy had been too afraid to try again. I quietly moved to the dresser and reached behind it. My arthritic fingers searched the dusty space until they touched plastic. The walkie-talkie was still there. I pulled it out, praying it still had batteries. I pressed the button. Tommy, are you there?" I whispered urgently. There was no response. Of course, Tommy was with Cynthia, probably miles away by now. The walkie-talkie's range wouldn't reach him anyway. But then another idea struck me. What if someone else had a similar walkie-talkie in the neighborhood? These were children's toys, after all. What if I could reach another child, another family? I pressed the button again. Hello? Can anyone hear me? This is an emergency. My name is Eleanor Marshall. I'm being held prisoner by my son. I need help. Please, can you tell your parents to call the police? I released the button and waited, hearing only static. I repeated my message several times, my hope fading with each attempt. But then, just as I was about to give up, the walkie-talkie crackled to life. Hello? Who is this? It was a young voice, a girl by the sound of it. My name is Eleanor, I said quickly. I'm an elderly woman being held prisoner by my son. I need help. Please, can you tell your parents to call the police? There was a pause. Is this a joke? My dad says I shouldn't talk to strangers on the walkie-talkie. Please, I begged, tears forming in my eyes. This isn't a joke. I'm in real danger. I'm at 1472 Maple Street. Tell your parents an old woman needs help. I heard muffled voices as if the girl was talking to someone else. Then a deeper, adult voice came through. Who is this? What's going on? I quickly explained my situation, talking as fast as I could, aware that Michael could return to my room at any moment. I told them about being locked in, about the money, about the plans to take me away tonight. Stay calm, ma'am, the man's voice said firmly. I'm calling 911 right now. We're at 1455 Maple, just down the street. Help is coming. I nearly collapsed with relief, but my moment of hope was shattered by the sound of Michael's footsteps coming down the stairs. Quickly, I shoved the walkie-talkie back behind the dresser and returned to sitting on my bed, trying to compose my face to hide the glimmer of hope I now felt. Because for the first time in months, I had a chance at freedom, if only help would arrive before Michael and Cynthia could carry out their sinister plan. I heard the front door open and close. Cynthia had returned. Their muffled voices grew heated, obviously discussing me and their plans. I strained to hear, catching fragments. Papers ready? What if she refuses? Doctor waiting. Each word increased my anxiety, but I clung to the hope that help was coming. I just needed to stall them. The door to my room opened. Michael entered, followed by Cynthia, who was clutching a folder of documents. Their faces were masks of determination. "Mom," he said with forced pleasantness, "we need you to sign these papers. It's for your own good." "What exactly am I signing?" I asked, trying to sound calm. "Just some forms giving us temporary guardianship," Cynthia explained smoothly, "so we can get you the help you need." "I'd like to read them first," I said, reaching for the papers. Michael and Cynthia exchanged glances. "There's really no need," Michael said. "It's all standard legal language." "If it's standard, then there's no harm in me reading it," I insisted. Reluctantly, Cynthia handed me the documents. As I suspected, they were far more than temporary guardianship forms. I was looking at papers that would give Michael complete control over my finances, my medical decisions, and my living arrangements permanently. "I'm not signing these," I said firmly, handing them back. Michael's fake smile vanished. "You don't have a choice, Mom. Either you sign them voluntarily or we do this another way." "What other way?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Cynthia pulled a small bottle from her purse. "Dr. Baxter prescribed this to help with your anxiety during the transfer to Peaceful Pines. If you take it willingly, this will all be much easier." I recognized the manipulation tactic, make it seem like cooperation was a choice, when in reality they were going to drug me either way. "I don't need medication, and I'm not going to any care facility." Michael sighed dramatically. "Why do you always have to make things difficult? This is happening whether you cooperate or not." He reached for my arm, but I pulled away. "Don't touch me." "Mom, be reasonable," he said, his voice hardening. "You can't live alone anymore, and we can't keep you here. Peaceful Pines is a nice place." "A nice place where you can visit once a month while spending my money?" I challenged. Cynthia's face flushed with anger. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you thank us? Do you know how hard it's been having you here? The sacrifices we've made?" "Sacrifices?" I laughed bitterly. "You locked me in a room and stole my money. What exactly have you sacrificed?" Michael grabbed my arm roughly. "Enough. You're taking this medication and signing these papers, or I'll sign them for you. Your handwriting is shaky enough these days that no one would know the difference." Just as he was reaching for the bottle in Cynthia's hand, we heard a sound that made all three of us freeze. The unexpected wail of police sirens, growing louder as they approached the house. Michael's face went pale. "What did you do?" he hissed at me. Before I could answer, there was a loud knocking at the front door, followed by an authoritative voice. "Police, open up!" Cynthia looked panicked. "Michael, what do we do?" "Stay calm," he whispered urgently. "Remember the story. Mom has dementia. She's confused. She makes up stories." He turned to me, his eyes cold with warning. "Not a word, Mom. Not one word." But it was too late for their threats to frighten me. Help had arrived, and I wasn't going to waste this chance. "I'm down here," I shouted as loudly as my old lungs could allow. "Help! I'm being held prisoner!" Michael lunged toward me but stopped when we heard the front door crash open. There were heavy footsteps and shouts of, "Police, show your hands!" Seconds later, 2 officers appeared at my bedroom door, weapons drawn. "Hands where we can see them," one ordered Michael and Cynthia, who complied, looking stunned. "I'm Eleanor Marshall," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. "These people have been keeping me locked in this room against my will. They took my money and were planning to drug me tonight." One officer stayed with Michael and Cynthia, while the other approached me. "Are you hurt, ma'am?" he asked, gently. No, I said, tears finally breaking free. But I've been a prisoner here for months. The officer nodded sympathetically. We received a call from your neighbors about a possible elder abuse situation. Can you tell me what happened? As I began explaining, Michael interrupted. Officer, my mother suffers from dementia. She gets confused and makes up stories. We have medical documentation. Sir, you'll have your chance to speak. The officer cut him off firmly. Right now, I'm talking to your mother. Over the next hour, the house became a flurry of activity. More officers arrived, statements were taken, the documents Michael and Cynthia had prepared were confiscated as evidence. Paramedics came to check me over. I learned that the neighbors who had received my walkie-talkie message had not only called 911, but had also recorded part of my distress call as proof. As Michael and Cynthia were being handcuffed and led to separate police cars, I felt a complex mix of emotions: relief at my rescue, grief over my son's betrayal, and worry about what would happen next. Where would I go? What about Tommy? Mrs. Marshall, said a kind-faced female officer, we've contacted Adult Protective Services. They'll help arrange safe accommodation for you tonight, and then we'll figure out next steps. What about my grandson? I asked anxiously. Tommy is innocent in all this. He tried to help me. Tommy is with his aunt, she assured me. She's been informed of the situation. He'll be taken care of while we sort this out. As I was helped into the ambulance for a precautionary check at the hospital, I looked back at the house that had been my prison. Michael was in the back of a police car, his face a mask of anger and disbelief. Our eyes met briefly, and in that moment, I felt nothing but sadness for the son I had raised and lost to greed. The ambulance doors closed and I was finally free. But freedom brought its own challenges and uncertainties. What would happen to Michael and Cynthia? Would I ever recover my money? Where would I live? And most importantly, what would become of my relationship with Tommy, the brave boy who never stopped believing his grandmother? As the ambulance pulled away, I realized that while one nightmare had ended, the journey to rebuild my shattered life was just beginning.
The hospital was a whirlwind of activity. Doctors examined me, social workers interviewed me, and police officers took my formal statement. After months of isolation, the attention was overwhelming, but I was grateful for every kind word and gentle touch from the staff. Mrs. Marshall, you're suffering from mild dehydration and slight malnutrition, the doctor told me. But considering what you've been through, you're in remarkably good shape. The social worker, a compassionate woman named Miss Rivera, explained what would happen next. We've arranged temporary emergency housing for you at Sunshine Assisted Living. It's just until we can sort out your financial situation and find you something permanent. My money, I said anxiously. My son took everything from the sale of my house. The police are investigating that, she assured me. Financial crimes against seniors are taken very seriously. They've already frozen your son's accounts. I spent that night in the hospital, sleeping better than I had in months, despite the unfamiliar surroundings and occasional nurse checks. For the first time in a long time, I felt safe. The next morning, as I was preparing to leave for Sunshine Assisted Living, I had an unexpected visitor. It was a middle-aged woman I didn't recognize, her eyes red from crying. Mrs. Marshall? She said tentatively. I'm Sandra, Michael's sister-in-law, Cynthia's sister. I tensed immediately. What do you want? I've brought someone who really wants to see you, she said, stepping aside, to reveal Tommy standing behind her, his young face a mixture of anxiety and hope. Grandma, he cried, rushing to my bedside and throwing his arms around me. I held him tight, tears flowing freely down both our faces.
When we finally separated, Tommy looked at me earnestly. "I'm sorry, Grandma. I should have helped you sooner." "Oh, Tommy," I said, stroking his hair. "You did help me. You were the only one who knew something was wrong. You're my hero." Sandra approached cautiously. "Mrs. Marshall, I want you to know I had no idea what Michael and Cynthia were doing. When the police called last night and explained everything," her voice broke. "I'm so sorry. Tommy's been telling me how they kept you locked up. It's unforgivable." I nodded, not quite ready to accept apologies from anyone in that family, even if she was innocent. "What's going to happen to Mom and Dad?" Tommy asked, his voice small. I looked to Sandra, who answered gently. "They're in jail right now, Tommy. They've done something very wrong, and they'll have to answer for that." Tommy's face crumpled. "Where will I live?" "With me," Sandra said firmly. "The court has granted me temporary custody." She turned to me. "Mrs. Marshall, I know you have every reason to distrust our family, but Tommy loves you. I'd like to bring him to visit you, if that's okay." The thought of being separated from Tommy after everything was painful, but I understood the reality of the situation. I was an elderly woman with no home and no money. I couldn't take care of a child. "I'd like that very much," I said, squeezing Tommy's hand. Later that day, I was settled into Sunshine Assisted Living. It was clean and pleasant enough, but it wasn't home. The staff were kind and the other residents welcoming, but I felt adrift, uncertain of my future. Days passed in a blur of police interviews, meetings with lawyers, and visits from victim advocates. I learned that Michael and Cynthia were facing multiple charges: elder abuse, false imprisonment, fraud, and attempted drugging without consent. The evidence against them was overwhelming, including the forged medical records, the locked room, and the financial paper trail showing how they'd spent my money. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after my rescue, I received a visit from Detective Garcia, who was handling my case. "Mrs. Marshall, we have some good news," he said, sitting across from me in the facility's garden. "We've managed to recover a significant portion of your funds." My heart leapt. "How much?" "About $140,000 of the original $220,000, he said. "Your son and daughter-in-law spent some of it already. Home renovations, a new car, luxury items, but we froze their accounts before they could spend it all." It wasn't everything, but it was enough to give me options, to give me back some control over my life. "There's more," Detective Garcia continued. "We found evidence that they were planning to sell your personal belongings, jewelry, keepsakes, family heirlooms. Those have all been recovered and are being held in secure storage until you can claim them." I thought of my wedding ring, my mother's pearls, the handmade quilt my grandmother had sewn, irreplaceable treasures I had thought lost forever. "When can I get them?" I asked eagerly. "Soon," he promised. "There's just some paperwork to complete." As Detective Garcia was leaving, he paused. "Mrs. Marshall, I've been a cop for 20 years, and I've seen a lot of elder abuse cases. But I've rarely seen someone with your resilience. You should be proud of yourself for surviving and for fighting back." His words stayed with me long after he left. I had survived, I had fought back, and now, despite everything, I had a future to plan. The following weekend, Sandra brought Tommy to visit as promised. We sat in the sunny community room, playing checkers and talking about normal things: his school, his friends, a book he was reading. It felt wonderfully ordinary after months of fear and isolation. "Grandma," Tommy said suddenly, looking up from the checkerboard, "are you going to get your own place again?" "I hope so, sweetheart," I said. The police found some of my money, so I should be able to afford a small apartment. Tommy's face lit up. That's great. Maybe it could be near us. Sandra's house has a guest room, and she said you could stay there while you look for a place. I glanced at Sandra, who nodded confirmation. I meant what I said about wanting to make this right, Mrs. Marshall. Tommy needs you in his life, and after what my sister and brother-in-law did, I feel responsible for helping you rebuild your life, Sandra said sincerely. I was touched, but cautious. My trust had been so profoundly broken that I found it difficult to accept kindness without questioning motives. Thank you, Sandra. Let me think about it, I replied carefully. As Tommy and Sandra left that day, I watched them walk to the car from my window, Tommy turning to wave enthusiastically. Despite everything, I felt a small spark of hope igniting within me. Perhaps from the ashes of betrayal, something new and positive could emerge, not just survival, but a meaningful life again. That night, lying in my bed at Sunshine Assisted Living, I thought about all that had happened. The betrayal still cut deep, but I was beginning to see beyond the pain to the possibilities ahead. With $140,000, I could find a modest place to live. I could be near Tommy. I could have a second chance at this final chapter of my life. The road to recovery would be long and difficult, but for the first time since my ordeal began, I felt ready to walk it. Because sometimes the darkest moments in our lives can lead to unexpected blessings, if only we have the courage to keep moving forward.
3 months passed. My life began to take shape again, piece by fragmented piece. The criminal case against Michael and Cynthia moved forward, with a trial date set for the following year. They remained in jail, unable to post the high bail the judge had set due to their frozen assets and the severity of the charges. I had moved out of Sunshine Assisted Living and into Sandra's guest room, accepting her offer after several weeks of deliberation. It wasn't an easy decision. Trusting anyone connected to the family that had betrayed me required a leap of faith I wasn't sure I could make, but Tommy's presence tipped the scales. The joy on his face when I arrived with my 2 small suitcases of recovered belongings was worth the risk. Sandra proved to be nothing like her sister. She was a divorced elementary school teacher with a modest home and a kind heart. She gave me space when I needed it and company when I wanted it. Most importantly, she facilitated my relationship with Tommy, understanding how vital we were to each other's healing. "He's different when you're around," she told me one evening as we washed dishes together after dinner. "More like the Tommy I knew before all this happened. You ground him." "He does the same for me," I admitted. With the recovered money, I began looking for a small apartment nearby. Sandra had suggested I stay permanently, but I needed my own space, a place that was truly mine, where I made the rules and held the keys. I found it in a senior living community, just 10 minutes from Sandra's house, a 1-bedroom apartment with a tiny patio where I could have potted plants. It wasn't my old house with its decades of memories, but it was mine, free and clear. The day I signed the lease was momentous. The property manager handed me the keys with a smile. "Congratulations, Mrs. Marshall. Welcome to your new home." I clutched those keys tightly, remembering how Michael had taken my house keys after moving me in, claiming he'd keep them safe. These new keys represented not just a physical space, but my reclaimed independence. Tommy helped me move in, carrying small boxes and arranging furniture with the serious dedication only a 12-year-old can muster. Sandra had helped me purchase essentials: a comfortable bed, a small sofa, a dining table with 2 chairs,
basic kitchen supplies. "This place is cool, Grandma," Tommy declared as he arranged my books on a small shelf. "You can see the park from your window." My new apartment was modest but perfect. The senior community offered security, activities, and transportation services when needed. Most importantly, I could lock my door from the inside, open my windows whenever I wanted, and come and go freely. Simple freedoms I would never again take for granted. As my physical environment stabilized, I also worked on healing emotionally. A victim advocate had connected me with a counselor who specialized in trauma and elder abuse. Dr. Lewis, a gentle-voiced woman in her 50s, helped me process the complex emotions of being betrayed by my own child. "What you're feeling is completely normal," she assured me during one of our sessions. "The grief, the anger, the confusion, these are all natural responses to such a profound betrayal." "Will I ever understand why he did it?" I asked her, the question that haunted my sleepless nights. "We may never fully understand the why," she said thoughtfully. "People rationalize their worst behaviors in ways that make sense to them only. What matters now is your healing, your future." She encouraged me to join a support group for survivors of family abuse. There, I met other elderly people who had suffered similar betrayals: financial exploitation by children, physical abuse by caregivers, isolation and gaslighting by those they trusted most. Their stories were heartbreaking, but their resilience was inspiring. Marge, an 82-year-old whose nephew had emptied her bank accounts, became a particular friend. "The money hurt," she told me over coffee after one meeting, "but not as much as realizing someone I loved saw me as nothing but a dollar sign." I nodded, understanding completely. "How do you move past that?" She patted my hand. "You don't move past it, dear. You move through it. You acknowledge the pain, you cry your tears, and then you decide not to let it define the rest of your days." Wise words that I carried with me as I rebuilt my life. The legal proceedings continued in the background. I gave depositions, met with prosecutors, and prepared myself for the possibility of testifying against my own son. The evidence was so overwhelming that the prosecutors were confident Michael and Cynthia would accept a plea deal rather than face a jury. Elder abuse cases can be difficult to prosecute successfully, the assistant district attorney explained. Juries sometimes have biases about elderly witnesses, questioning their reliability. But in your case, Mrs. Marshall, the evidence is exceptional. The locked room, the financial records, the walkie-talkie recording, and your grandson's testimony about the conditions you were kept in. Tommy had indeed been interviewed by child psychologists and had confirmed everything about my imprisonment. His testimony would be devastating to his parents' defense, a fact that troubled him deeply despite his understanding of their wrongdoing. "I feel like I'm betraying them," he confided in me one afternoon as we walked through the park near my new apartment. "I'm not betraying them, Tommy," I said gently. "You're standing up for the truth. There's a big difference." "Will they hate me?" he asked, his voice small. I stopped walking and turned to face him, placing my hands on his shoulders. "Tommy, listen to me. What your parents did was wrong. Very wrong. But I believe they love you in their way. Their actions as their responsibility, not yours. All you've done is tell the truth." He nodded, but I could see the burden he carried. At 12 years old, he was navigating emotional complexities that would challenge most adults. I wish I could shield him from all of it, but some lessons can't be avoided, only survived. Sandra was a godsend during this period. She maintained appropriate boundaries with Tommy regarding his parents, neither demonizing them nor excusing their actions. She ensured he had professional support through a child therapist and created a stable, loving environment for him. "He's going to be okay," she assured me one evening when I expressed my concerns. "Between you and me, he has that." As the months passed and my new life took shape, I found myself thinking less about Michael and Cynthia and more about the future. I joined a book club at the senior center, started volunteering at the local library reading to children, and even took a computer class so I could video chat with old friends who had moved away. Life wasn't perfect. I had nightmares sometimes, waking in a panic thinking I was back in that locked room. Certain sounds, like a key in a lock, a door closing firmly, could trigger anxiety. But day by day, I reclaimed my life, my confidence, and my joy. Not despite what happened, but because I had survived it. Because I had learned that even at 78, I was stronger than I knew. And so are you if you ever find yourself facing the unimaginable. Remember that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about moving forward despite the fear, one small step at a time.
6 months after my rescue, on a crisp autumn morning, I received the call we'd been waiting for. Michael and Cynthia had accepted a plea deal. They would each serve 3 years in prison for elder abuse and financial exploitation, followed by 5 years of probation. They were required to pay full restitution for the money they had spent, though how they would do that remained unclear. Most importantly, they would have no contact with me unless I initiated it. "Are you satisfied with this outcome, Mrs. Marshall?" the prosecutor asked me. Was I satisfied? It was a complicated question. No prison sentence could undo the betrayal or restore my trust in the son I had raised. No restitution could compensate for the months of fear and isolation I had endured. "I think it's fair," I finally answered. "I don't want vengeance. I just want justice, and to ensure they can't do this to anyone else." The prosecutor seemed to understand. The plea includes mandatory counseling during and after their incarceration. It won't change the past, but it might impact their future choices. After the call, I sat on my small patio, watching the birds at my newly installed feeder. The legal resolution brought a sense of closure, but also stirred up complex emotions. Despite everything, there was a small part of me, the mother part, that ached for what Michael had thrown away. Not just his freedom or his reputation, but our relationship, Tommy's childhood innocence, the basic human connection of family. Tommy took the news of his parents' plea deal with quiet resignation. At 13 now, he had grown noticeably in the months since my rescue. Not just physically taller, but emotionally more mature, with an old soul's wisdom in his young eyes. "Will you visit them in prison?" I asked him gently as we walked to the ice cream shop that had become our Saturday tradition. He kicked a stone along the sidewalk, thinking. "Sandra says I can if I want to, but I don't know if I want to yet." "That's okay," I assured him. "You don't have to decide right now, or ever, if that's what feels right to you." He nodded, then asked the question I knew had been weighing on him. "Will you ever forgive them, Grandma?" I considered my answer carefully. Forgiveness isn't something you can force. It's a process, and it happens in its own time, if it happens at all. Right now, I'm focused on healing and moving forward with my life. That's enough for now. He seemed satisfied with that answer, and we moved on to discussing his upcoming science fair project, a welcome return to normal teenage concerns. As winter gave way to spring, my new life continued to develop roots and branches. My apartment had become a true home, filled with recovered keepsakes, new purchases, and small treasures Tommy made for me in his art class. I had friends in the senior community, a busy calendar of activities, and a sense of purpose through my volunteer work. One particularly meaningful development was my involvement with a local elder rights advocacy group.
After hearing my story, they asked if I would be willing to share it at community awareness events. The thought of speaking publicly about my ordeal was daunting, but I agreed. My first presentation was at a local senior center to an audience of about 30 people. My hands trembled as I stood at the podium, but as I began to speak, sharing the warning signs I had missed and the manipulation tactics Michael and Cynthia had used, my voice grew stronger. The audience listened intently, some nodding in recognition, others looking shocked. During the question and answer session afterward, an elderly gentleman raised his hand. "My son has been suggesting I sell my house and move in with him. He's been very insistent lately. After hearing your story, I'm going to tell him no." His words made every moment of discomfort in sharing my story worthwhile. If even one person avoided my fate because of my willingness to speak out, it gave meaning to my suffering. As my advocacy work expanded, I was invited to speak at law enforcement trainings, social work conferences, and community forums. I wasn't a polished speaker, but my authenticity resonated with audiences. I became known as Grandma Eleanor, a voice for vulnerable seniors who might otherwise suffer in silence. Tommy often attended these events when they didn't conflict with school, sitting proudly in the front row. After one presentation, as we were leaving, he said, "You're like a superhero, Grandma. You took something really bad and turned it into something good." His words touched me deeply. I hadn't thought of my advocacy work in those terms. But he was right. There was a power in reclaiming my story, in using it to protect others. Life settled into a new normal that I couldn't have imagined during those dark days of captivity. I had my freedom, my voice, and most precious of all, my relationship with Tommy. Sandra remained a steadfast support, creating a loving, extended family unit that defied conventional boundaries. About a year after my rescue, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Michael, written from prison. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it, unsure if I wanted to read his words. Finally, curiosity won out. The letter was brief. The handwriting I recognized as my son's, now looking shakier than I remembered. "Mom, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. What I did to you was unforgivable. The counselor here says I should take responsibility for my actions without excuses, so that's what I'm trying to do. I was wrong, completely wrong. The person I became is someone I don't recognize or understand. I'm working to figure out how I could have done such terrible things to my own mother. I won't contact you again unless you want me to. I just needed you to know that I am sorry, even though sorry isn't nearly enough. Michael." I folded the letter carefully and put it back in its envelope. Was it genuine remorse or another manipulation? I couldn't be sure, and I wasn't ready to respond. I placed the letter in a drawer, neither discarding it nor dwelling on it. Perhaps someday I would feel differently, but for now, it was enough to acknowledge it and then continue with my life, a life I had fought hard to reclaim. As I prepared for bed that night, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me had changed from the frightened prisoner I had been. There were new lines on my face, yes, but also a strength in my eyes that hadn't been there before. I had survived. I had rebuilt. And most importantly, I had found purpose in my pain. Tomorrow, I would speak at another community center. Tomorrow, I would have lunch with Marge from my support group. Tomorrow, I would help Tommy with his history project. Tomorrow was a gift I no longer took for granted. Because when you've had your freedom stolen, you understand its true value. And when you fought to reclaim your life, you cherish every moment of it, come what may.
2 years after my rescue, life had found a rhythm I never thought possible again. My small apartment in the senior community had become a true sanctuary, filled with plants, books, and photographs, mostly of Tommy, who at 14 was growing so fast I could barely keep up. I had expanded my advocacy work, traveling occasionally to speak at regional conferences about elder abuse prevention. My story had been featured in a documentary about financial exploitation of seniors, bringing national attention to an issue often hidden behind closed doors and family secrets. The producers had approached me cautiously, aware of the trauma I had experienced. "We want to give voice to survivors," the director explained, "but only if you feel comfortable sharing your story on this platform." After consideration and discussions with Dr. Lewis, my therapist, I agreed. The filming process was challenging but cathartic, requiring me to revisit painful memories while also celebrating my recovery. When the documentary aired, the response was overwhelming. Emails and letters from other survivors sharing their experiences, from family members who recognized warning signs because of my story, from professionals committed to better protecting vulnerable seniors. Tommy watched the documentary with Sandra and me, his hand gripping mine tightly during the most difficult parts. Afterward, he hugged me fiercely. "I'm so proud of you, Grandma," he whispered. His words meant everything. Michael and Cynthia remained in prison, now in their second year of their 3-year sentences. Michael had written 2 more letters since that first one, each showing what seemed to be increasing self-reflection and remorse. I had responded to the 3rd letter, not with forgiveness, which I still wasn't ready to offer, but with acknowledgement of his apparent efforts to understand his actions. Tommy had visited his parents twice, supervised by Sandra. The experiences had been emotional and complex for him, but he seemed more settled afterward, better able to separate their actions from his own identity and worth. "They look different," he told me after his second visit. "Smaller somehow." I understood what he meant. When you remove the power from those who have hurt you, they often diminish in your perception. Life wasn't without its challenges. I still had nightmares occasionally, certain triggers, a locked door, a raised voice. Someone questioning my memory could send me spiraling back to that small room where I'd been imprisoned. But Dr. Lewis had given me tools to manage these moments, to ground myself in the present reality of my freedom. One sunny Tuesday afternoon, I was preparing for a presentation at a local church when my phone rang. It was Sandra, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "Eleanor, I need to tell you something. Michael attempted suicide in prison last night." My heart seemed to stop. Despite everything, he was still my son, the baby I had nursed, the child whose scraped knees I had bandaged, the young man whose graduation I had celebrated through proud tears. "Is he—" I couldn't finish the question. "He's alive," Sandra assured me quickly. "His cellmate found him in time. He's in the prison infirmary under suicide watch." I sat down heavily, my presentation notes fluttering to the floor. "Does Tommy know?" "Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first. We need to decide how to tell him, what details to share." We agreed that Tommy needed to know the basic truth, but not the graphic details. Sandra would tell him when he got home from school, with his therapist on standby for support. After hanging up, I canceled my presentation and sat in my recliner, staring out the window at the familiar park view that usually brought me comfort. My emotions were a tangled mess: concern for Michael, worry about Tommy's reaction, and a deep sadness for all that had been lost. Later that evening, Sandra called again. "Tommy took it hard, but he's processing it. His therapist came over and they had a good talk. He wants to see you tomorrow." The next day, Tommy came to my apartment after school. He looked tired, his eyes red-rimmed from crying. We sat on my small sofa, and I held his hand as he tried to understand why his father would try to end his life. "Dad left a note," Tommy said quietly. "Sandra didn't tell me everything it said, but she said he wrote that he couldn't live with what he'd done to you and to me." I pulled Tommy close, wishing I could shield him from this pain.
Your father made terrible choices, Tommy, but he's still a human being capable of suffering and regret. What he did yesterday doesn't erase his wrongs, but it suggests he's finally facing the reality of them. Tommy nodded against my shoulder. Are you going to visit him? The question caught me off guard. Was I? Should I? After everything, did I owe Michael anything at all? I don't know, I answered honestly. I need to think about it. Over the next few days, I discussed the situation with Dr. Lewis, trying to navigate my conflicted feelings. There's no right or wrong decision here, Eleanor, she said gently. Visiting Michael would not mean you forgive or excuse his actions. Not visiting doesn't make you cruel or unfeeling. This is about what feels right for your healing journey. After much reflection, I decided to visit. Not for Michael's sake, but for my own closure and for Tommy, who was struggling to reconcile the father who had committed terrible crimes with the father who was now apparently consumed by remorse. The prison was a 3-hour drive. Sandra offered to take me, but I arranged for a community transportation service instead, needing this space to prepare myself emotionally. Security at the prison was stringent: ID checks, metal detectors, strict rules about what could be brought in. The visiting room was stark and institutional, with hard plastic chairs and tables bolted to the floor. I waited nervously, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. When Michael was led in by a guard, I almost didn't recognize him. He had lost weight, his face gaunt and pale, his eyes hollow. He moved slowly, like a much older man. The prison jumpsuit hung loosely on his frame. A bandage was visible on his left wrist, a stark reminder of why I was there. He stopped when he saw me, surprise and something like fear crossing his face. The guard directed him to sit across from me, then stepped back to a respectful distance. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. The son who had betrayed me, the mother who had survived his betrayal. I didn't expect you to come, he finally said, his voice hoarse. Neither did I admitted. Another silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of all that had happened. Why did you do it? I asked, the question encompassing both his crimes against me and his attempt to end his life. Michael's eyes filled with tears. I've been asking myself that every day in here. The counselor says it was a combination of things: financial pressure, entitlement, rationalization, but those are just words. They don't explain how I could have done that to my own mother. He looked down at his bandaged wrist. When I finally really faced what I did, really let myself feel the full weight of it without excuses or denial, I couldn't bear it. I felt no triumph in his suffering, only sadness for all that had been destroyed. Tommy is struggling to understand. At the mention of his son, Michael's face crumbled. I've ruined everything for him: his childhood, his trust, his family. He's resilient. He has Sandra and he has me. He'll be okay eventually. Because of you, he acknowledged. After everything I did, you're still there for him. I don't deserve to be his father. This isn't about what you deserve, I said firmly. It's about what Tommy needs. We talked for nearly an hour, not about forgiveness or reconciliation, which would have been premature if not impossible, but about Tommy's well-being, about Michael's treatment in prison, about the long road of accountability that lay ahead if he truly wanted to make amends. As our visit ended, Michael looked at me directly for the first time. I know I've lost the right to ask anything of you, Mom, but please tell Tommy I'm sorry and I'm getting help so I can be better, even if I can never make up for what I've done. I nodded, making no promises beyond that. As I left the prison, I felt emotionally drained but somehow lighter. The visit hadn't erased the past or healed all wounds, but it had helped me see Michael as a deeply flawed human rather than the monster of my nightmares. That shift, as small as it was, felt significant in my ongoing healing. In the car ride home, watching the landscape pass by, I reflected on the unexpected turns my life had taken. At 80 years old, I had survived imprisonment, rebuilt my life, become an advocate, and now faced the complex task of finding peace with a past that could never be undone. It wasn't the retirement I had envisioned, but there was meaning in it, purpose born of pain, and a hard-won wisdom I hoped might help others avoid the same fate. And most precious of all, there was Tommy, the unexpected blessing in all of this, the grandson whose love had been my lifeline in the darkest times. Whatever the future held, that love would sustain us both.
5 years have passed since my rescue from that small, locked room. I'm 83 now, with the expected aches and slower pace that come with advancing age. But my mind remains sharp, my spirit resilient. Michael and Cynthia completed their prison sentences 2 years ago. Upon release, Cynthia moved to another state, making no attempts to contact Tommy or me. Michael took a different path. After prison, he entered a halfway house, continued intensive therapy, and slowly, cautiously began rebuilding his relationship with Tommy through supervised visits and counseling sessions. I maintained a careful distance, protecting my hard-won peace and independence. We have a cordial but distant relationship now. Occasional phone calls, brief encounters at Tommy's school events. It's not forgiveness exactly, but a pragmatic coexistence for Tommy's sake. Some wounds go too deep for complete healing, but they no longer define my daily existence. Tommy is 17 now, preparing for college next year. He's grown into a remarkable young man, thoughtful, compassionate, with a particular sensitivity to the needs of older people. His experience with me has shaped him in ways that transform tragedy into purpose. He volunteers at a senior center, helps run an intergenerational technology program, and plans to study social work with a focus on elder care. "You inspired that," Sandra told me during a recent family dinner. "He saw how you turned your trauma into advocacy, and it showed him how to make meaning from difficult experiences." My advocacy work has evolved over the years. What began as simple community presentations has grown into a structured program I developed with social workers and law enforcement. Recognizing elder exploitation trains professionals and family members to identify warning signs of abuse and provides resources for intervention. The program has been implemented in 3 states now, with plans for national expansion. Last month, I received a letter from a woman in Arizona whose mother had been saved from a situation similar to mine because a neighbor recognized the warning signs from one of our training sessions. "You'll never know how many people you've helped, how many lives you've changed," the letter concluded. Perhaps that's the most unexpected outcome of my ordeal, that the darkest chapter of my life became the catalyst for my most meaningful contribution. The pain remains a part of me, but it no longer consumes me. Instead, it fuels a purpose I never anticipated in my golden years. My life today is full in ways I couldn't have imagined during those months of captivity. I still live in my senior community apartment, though I've upgraded to a slightly larger unit with a bedroom for Tommy to stay in when he visits. I have dear friends, a calendar filled with activities I choose, and the profound freedom of coming and going as I please, a freedom I will never again take for granted. Sandra remains a cherished presence in my life, more family now than in-law. We celebrate holidays together, take occasional weekend trips, and support each other through life's challenges. Our unconventional family unit, formed through trauma but sustained by genuine care, proves that family can be redefined by choice and commitment rather than merely by blood.
Recently, I was asked to speak at a congressional hearing on elder justice legislation. As I stood at the podium, looking out at the room filled with lawmakers and advocates, I thought about how far I had come from that frightened woman trapped in a small room believing her life was effectively over. I stand before you not just as a survivor, I told the assembly, but as a witness to both the worst and the best of humanity. I experienced betrayal by those who should have protected me, but also rescue by neighbors who responded to a child's walkie-talkie call. I know the profound darkness of having my freedom and dignity stripped away, but also the immeasurable joy of reclaiming them. I paused, making eye contact with various committee members before continuing. The legislation you're considering today isn't just about legal protections or funding allocations. It's about recognizing that our elders deserve to age with dignity, security, and respect. It's about creating systems that protect vulnerable seniors before they end up locked in rooms like I was. And it's about ensuring that if the unthinkable does happen, survivors have the support they need to rebuild their lives. The bill passed, establishing stronger protections for seniors and increased penalties for those who exploit them. When the president signed it into law, I was invited to attend the ceremony, an honor I never could have imagined. As I reflect on the journey that brought me here, I think about how often we focus on the big moments of crisis or triumph, overlooking the quiet daily choices that truly define our lives. It was not just the dramatic rescue that saved me, but also the decision each day afterward to get up, to move forward, to rebuild despite the pain. It was not just the public speeches or congressional testimony that made a difference, but the countless private conversations with other survivors offering understanding only someone who has walked a similar path can provide. Tomorrow, Tommy graduates from high school. I'll sit in the audience between Sandra and, yes, Michael, an arrangement that would have seemed impossible years ago. We will celebrate Tommy's achievements separately afterwards, maintaining the boundaries that serve my well-being. It's not a perfect resolution, not a neat and tidy ending to our family story. But life rarely offers those, does it? What life does offer is the chance to write new chapters even after the most devastating experiences. It offers the possibility of purpose born from pain, of connections forged in the aftermath of betrayal, and of finding meaning in the very experiences we never would have chosen. At 83, I know that my story isn't over yet. There will be more challenges, more losses, more moments of both joy and sorrow. But I face them now with the unshakable knowledge of my resilience, with the support of chosen family, and with the perspective that comes from having lost everything and built something new from the ruins. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. It's never too late to reclaim your life. It's never too late to find purpose in your pain. And it's never too late to discover that you are stronger than you ever imagined possible. Because sometimes the greatest strength emerges not despite our most painful experiences, but because of them. And that strength can change not only your own life, but the lives of countless others who need to know that even in the darkest rooms, hope finds a way to enter, sometimes through unexpected means, like a child's walkie-talkie and the courage to call for help when it matters most.